Hey guys. Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Punchline number one. Pretty interesting comic that I think should be worth talking about. I just kind of picked this up in the aftermath of the Joker War. It's a standalone book, which I think is pretty neat. Co-written by James Tinian IV and um, Sam Johns. Art by Mirka Andolfo, colors by Romulo Faria Jr., and letters by Gabriella Downey. And it's very much just all about kind of what was set up at the end of the Joker War. And you can kind of go back to our archives and look at my review of that particular event if you want my opinions on that and my early impression of Punchline, one of the Joker's minions. But this book is all about kind of her subsequent trial after those events, which had been set up at the end of the Joker War. Adrian Benningfield, Karsten Logan, thanks for joining us. And they do a pretty good job at following up on that in a way that's kind of fun. At the end of the Joker War, Punchline sort of sets herself up as a victim of the Joker as much as everyone else, and sort of an unwitting accomplice, but one who didn't actually kill anybody. Does, as is kind of documented in this book, but was hinted at the end of the Joker War, she considers herself innocent. And this entire book is kind of jumping between us learning about how this woman became Punchline, as well as her trial, which is closely watched by Dr. Leslie Tompkins of Gotham fame, but also just as a Batman character, and Harper, Bluebird, which I thought was a cool choice as the sort of resident Gotham vigilante that's sort of just around and observing this trial to make sure if reinforcements are needed, they can be called in. If something goes haywire, there's at least a superhero around of some form, or vigilante, whatever you want to call her, to potentially stop things. Carson says, "Hey Arden, do you think Punchline is in love with the Joker?" Well, that's kind of interesting because let's get into the book a little bit, because my early impression of Punchline was that she really wasn't quite as enamored with the Joker and didn't have as many illusions about him as someone compared to, say, like Harley Quinn, who very much was like enamored with him and loved her perception of him, even though he didn't care about her and treated her terribly and all that stuff. I would argue this book kind of shows us a more nuanced side of that, maybe. Carson says, "What's going on with Harley Quinn?" Thanks, Adrian. That's um. Oh, well, I don't know. She's like part of Batman's crew as of the Joker War, but I think she's just otherwise doing whatever's going on in her solo issue. She seems to be leaving the Suicide Squad post Future State, which is kind of interesting. See what all that means, but that's about all I know. As far as she's concerned about Punchline, it's interesting that Harley isn't involved in this because Punchline talks a lot about how innocent she is in all of this, and I kept thinking about how she slit Harley Quinn's throat. And, like, that's attempted murder, all on its own, let alone some of the stuff that they correctly point out she's tied to with the Joker's crimes, even if she didn't commit a lot of that herself. She commanded and was involved in so many things. But it's kind of interesting because Gotham doesn't know that. And Punchline in her flashbacks sort of talks about how Gotham doesn't know a lot of things about the Joker and has often missed the punchline. She talks about Amusement Mile and how there's this big cover up with GCPD. Something went down with Jim Gordon, daughter, and that's all she really was able to determine. We know that story, and I thought that was a really interesting moment where it's like, oh, so that stuff is a really public knowledge, and that changes our that story, the Killing Joke, changes our perception of the Joker as a character, and makes me wonder, like, what the people of Gotham really think of the Joker compared to Batman and his rampaging bat planes and Batmobiles that were used by the Joker in the Joker War. Again, like, how nuanced is the public really in all of this, and how much do they truly understand the Joker? And this book's kind of about that. Because around all of this, like the framing device for us learning about Punchline's origin story, we'll say, is Harper's brother starts listening to her old podcast, which kind of got like pulled from the internet, but obviously it's easy enough to find, and he starts listening to all the episodes. And this is one of the first times I've ever kind of understood without it being like distorting and stuff like that of who the Joker really is, how people become interested in the Joker and stuff like that. And it gets into the perception of things like I was talking about, and how someone kind of can go from investigating it to becoming as obsessed with it and gradually becoming of it. And Punchline, sure enough, starts experimenting with various Joker toxins and just trying to get the Joker's attention by murdering random people. But she leaves a lot of that out in the actual podcast. And again, like that, I feel like this book does a really good. Uh, it tells a good story in how people like fall in line with the Joker, even though in theory they shouldn't. I would argue, and I don't dislike this movie, but this book does a better job at explaining that idea than the Joker movie ever did. I think they're both kind of touching on similar things where he represents a certain need for anarchy and a frustration with stuff. And I think this book does a good job at showing us, like, oh, people don't necessarily see or understand the murderer. They also go back to, like, some of the Joker's earliest escapades, including, like, the infamous Joker fish, and they visit a memorial dedicated to that and the people killed around that event, which all very interesting stuff. So I definitely think I would recommend this book. I liked it more than Joker War, I'll say that. And I didn't hate Joker War, but this was strong. This was fun. This wasn't all Tinian the Fourth either. There's a certain flair to this book and how it's written that I think really has to come down to that Sam Johns guy, who, and forgive me if I should know the name, but I don't recognize it. But seems like a talented writer. I also think one of the strongest elements of this book is the artwork. What's this? Mirka and Dolfo, another name I don't know, does an amazing job and makes the Joker look great. This early scene where Punchline first encounters the Joker just through this random act of violence where he like executes this she's a student on tour at this news studio and he executes the crew and then makes her read some message to Batman or something like that. And that's just like her first terrifying encounter with the Joker that kind of sets her off. But yeah, it's a pretty cool book and has me kind of curious about her character. I think what I would like most from her is for her to sort of become one of Batman's villains and just sort of to increase Batman's rogues gallery a little bit, because I feel Batman's villains are more limited than people think. There is a huge initial roster, but once you burn past that, those known names like the Penguin, Riddler, all those guys, we run out pretty quickly. And I think the best example of that is the Arkham series. They've had to like kind of bring back villains to a degree because Batman only has so many cool villains. You know, there's been some cool new ones over time. Like Professor Pig is a good one. I'd love to see Mr. Bloom again. Um, Court of the Owls is a pretty good new Batman enemy. But I always welcome more. The only thing about Punchline I wish is that she was more distinct from the Joker as an identity. Though again, Harley Quinn has basically been eradicated from existence. Not like obviously as a character, but in terms of as a Joker ally. So we might as well have a new one in the mix. And she's interesting because I do think she kind of understands the Joker better than Quinn ever did. Quinn kind of saw him as like her one true love and stuff like that. Punchline, I think, just wants to better deliver his message to the world and make sure that people get the punchline in her words. And that's why she chose the name, because she feels moments like him crippling Barbara Gordon and some sort of crowning achievement that still haunts the city isn't known by the city. And there's something there. That's an interesting point that I don't think has really realized by a character before. So I'm kind of for it. This wouldn't make for a good ongoing series, but it does set up enough interesting stuff with Harper and her in general. And they say they are going to follow up on this in 2021. Like Bluebird's brother basically becomes one of the Joker gang at the end of this book, and it's a pretty cool story about how that sort of like online conspiracy can pull, especially like a teenager in. Karsten says, "Sorry, but once more, do you think Harley Quinn could become sane again?" Oh, the sane's a very loaded term. I don't really like to view Harley as that. I feel she's more traumatized and manic, maybe. I I don't know. You're asking the wrong person for that because all my psychology instincts are kicking in. I don't really think that's the ethos of your question. I think what you're really asking is, can she be redeemed? To which I would say, yeah, especially because her attempts to do so are very genuine. Even if they get kind of brushed off by the other superheroes. Some of them are starting to recognize that she's trying. I would like to see that more. You know what Harley Quinn's future should be? Is they should start a new Harley Quinn series, and I think it's not even going to be called Harley Quinn, with her, Batgirl, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle. Those four from Heroes in Crisis. I hated Heroes in Crisis so much, but those four should do something together because they were great as a Bucket Think Tank says the lack of a rogues gallery is a problem with a lot of established heroes, and that a lot of new ones never seem to stay. Also good. Yeah, it's been a quiet week. I've been busy. So much no. December's just going to be awful. But then January we'll get back to a much better schedule for me, which would be nice. Better than it's been in years. So I'm looking forward to that. Um, so yeah, whatever. This week was a wash, but I had stuff going on. It was my birthday yesterday, so if you're wondering what those are over there, those are gifts that haven't been quite opened yet. I did peek into one because I got all these gifts and have to wait till tomorrow to open them. But I was like, whatever. Not gonna be mad at me if I at least take a look at what they are. And oh, they're cool. You guys are gonna see them too because they're comic related. But I was just like, what are these big heavy things that I got delivered yesterday? So I checked one of them just to know if I needed to store them properly or something. And yeah, it's gonna be cool. So yeah, and I'm glad I'm not the only one who feels that way about Batman's Rogues Gallery. So thanks for sharing that, Bucket. Um, I agree, and I thought I hadn't really read your comment beforehand, but as I was reading it, I thought you were going to go in the direction of like in film and television and stuff, where those limits over time start to become more obvious. And I do think there's a mix of different issues here. One is that you have a writer introduce a new villain, and they're great. I'll read your awesome thing in a second, Henry Brown, but thank you. And then you also have, but then like a new writer comes in, and they don't bring up that old villain, so they don't get reused very well, and they don't really stick around. Then you get writers who kind of recognize a great, like character or villain from the past and they bring them back in and it's solid stuff. So you kind of have to find the balance all. Oh, cool. So, but and sometimes it's successfully done. I kind of did echo a few successful examples of it. Grant Morrison did it with Professor Pig because that villain's so cool that like it made sense for Arkham Knight to want to use him as one of their villains. Like, choice, and he was cool in that game because of it. Court of the Owls, Snyder stuck around enough to kind of use them in a few things and ensure that they were a bit of a franchise. B did a good job with their first initial story, so they had staying power and kind of inspired other writers to Court of the Owls and stuff. And C, like they're just built into Gotham's history and have enough interesting ideas that they very likely will show up in film one day. And I think DC knows that, so they've acted accordingly. Uh, but often these villains don't stick around, or they're not good enough to justify them becoming a permanent fixture in the Rogues Gallery. There's a lot of random villains over the years, far beyond just Batman. Like, Bucket was right to mention other heroes in his comment. Batman's one of the better ones, I would say. He has a pretty robust rogues gallery. You have some characters beyond the big names where it gets really limited really quickly. I would say this is an interesting one. Like Green Lantern was that until Jeff Johns came along and developed it. I think the Flash might have been that character at one time, but that's obviously changed over the years for various reasons, but in no small part because of just the show, straight up. Although a lot, the show's also done a good job in just embracing even the. But the thing is, like, you can have a villain like Condiment King show up in a CW show, but it's not going to work in a Batman movie unless it's a very different kind of Batman movie, like Lego Batman, where Condiment King did show up. So, just a matter of developing it a little and being creative with it. Okay. Henry Brown has donated two separate super chats. So, first of all, shout out from LA. Cool, man. Always good to hear from somebody from California. I've been to LA, and it's a cool city overall. One of my favorites. And then he says, a good comic is Ali versus Superman. And that's interesting because I've heard that before, but haven't read that myself. It seems like some of the sort of wild, creative fun that anyone can enjoy. So thank you for that. And then you also said happy birthday, so thanks. I wasn't really fishing for that, but Adrian also wished me a happy birthday, so that's cool. And Henry Brown says, what if Batman became the Anti-Monitor? Well, that's kind of interesting. I feel like visually it'd be kind of like the dark sidey Batman that we did in Death Metal, which was my first thought. It would just be a sort of dark character along those lines. One thing about that, though, is the Anti-Monitor isn't really a mantle, but a being with a very specific history that we actually know a lot more about now. So it's hard for me to picture him becoming the Anti-Monitor, but they've kind of shown how they can do that in Death Metal, where Batman just injects himself with some good old DNA and becomes like some other villain. So that would probably be it. I don't necessarily know if Batman would be any more efficient or better at Anti-Monitor things than the Anti-Monitor was. I'm just thinking in terms of Crisis of Infinite Earths, like that dude was barely stomped and wiped out most of the multiverse. He's pretty powerful and successful, though I can't really speak to his time like in the Sinestro Corps. It gets murky. Maybe Batman could do better with that because he already has affinity with the yellow light. So the Anti-Monitor has never really had trouble striking fear in others. So one of the few where I don't know if Batman would really change things actually, which is kind of interesting. His personality might just be like it might not be relevant to a being who can create this wave of death that just wipes out the universe. Like, how can Batman change that? I don't think it's a bad question. It's a very interesting question. It's just I one of the few times I don't know if it would have a huge effect on the Anti-Monitor character. Have a big effect on Batman's character. Adrian says, I think with Batman not dealing with regular criminals as a hindrance, there are non-supervillain organizations to use. Yeah, and that's happened before into some of the best Batman stories. Like Year One really just relies on like crooked cops, mob families. Early Gotham really leaned heavily in that direction, the show, and I think that was for its better. Although, on the other hand, that show really did kind of reach a special place in my heart when it went nuts with the villains. It like kind of veered in the other direction too. So that show was interesting because it kind of explores both elements of it. I think realistically, Batman works in a lot of different ways. Have him as a fun sort of 60s Adam West kind of character in like a Brave and the Bold type series or story or whatever. Or you can have him as, his usual modern grimdark self that we see these days. Adrian says, also off topic, Marvel is doing an Alien series, Alien versus Wolverine or Predator. Are you asking me or are you telling me? Because I haven't heard anything about that yet. Seems like a natural choice, but honestly, that's like, geez, they're just going for the bottom shelf stuff right away. Like the most obvious, easy choices if that's the case. Because it's like, well, I guess that like it'll sell well and people will be excited for Alien versus Wolverine. But it's like, whatever. He's fought the Brood before. That's why I've never really cared about the idea of a Marvel Comics crossover with Alien because the Brood already exists in Marvel. They're basically a Xenomorph ripoff, right? And says, "Oh, you are telling me. Oh, okay. It's fine. It's fine. It could be good. You get someone like Jason Aaron writing it, and it'll be no matter what. Or like put Hickman on that." Adrian is saying, "Oh, he thought it would be funny to add in Hickman. They're doing Aliens versus Predator. Okay, that's how I would start it. Is just let's do Alien versus Predator straight up. Maybe crossover stuff. Ace Moonshot just gave a great idea. Predator versus Craven the Hunter. Now, see, that's interesting because there is no Predator equivalent in the world of Marvel Comics, and there's where more of a crossover can take place. Plus, yeah, the Brood's been done before, but let Marvel go hog wild with some of that Prometheus Covenant stuff. Dark Horse did some really interesting things with that. I would love for Marvel to follow up on it, and that crossover with their superhero comics in an interesting way. Because, like, I don't know if y'all know what happened to Deacon in the comics, the little fake xenomorph at the end of the Prometheus movie, but he turns into a mountain that's sentient, and that I would love to see crossover with, like let's see how that interacts with Krakoa. That would be cool. Adrian says, also, Aliens is getting a television series on FX/Hulu. Eh, that's pretty cool. Um, Depends on what you do with it, obviously, but that's the kind of thing I think should maybe be a TV show. The movies haven't gone anywhere in a long, long time, so that could be interesting. Let's put it that way. Ridley Scott, the director of the first Alien movie, favorite out of the whole batch. I'm a little the minority in that regard because like the James Cameron sequel, but that's fine. But he has a TV show out called Raised by Wolves that I found very weird and very interesting. So I think an Alien TV show would be pretty cool. There's so many things you could do about that, and a lot of unexplored or underdeveloped aspects of the Xenomorph universe used well. Hulu is a natural place for it. Weird little roster of stuff now. Adrian says Aliens versus Brood could be an interesting galactic event. Yes, I will give you that because the Brood are different enough that those differences would be interesting in a versus competition between. I think if you throw them against, like, if you throw Xenomorphs against Wolverine, it's just gonna feel like him fighting the Brood, or like the superhero like that. But the Brood themselves are intelligent, very crafty and sophisticated, and are able to sort of take the powers and intelligence of the people they infect in a way the Xenomorphs don't. Xenomorphs are also just so aggressive and insane that I don't think they could just like count it out. They've got like a certain savagery, and they also have a hive mentality. It just doesn't seem sophisticated. They have a certain savagery to them, but that I would be so curious to see how that all interacts with the Brood. Because what happens when like a face hugger gets a hold of a Brood, for example? Well, that might change things up a little bit. So we've gotten off topic enough, I think. That will call things there. Clock says that I've been talking for 23 minutes now, and the last time I looked, it was 9. So I think that's good. But it's good to catch up with you guys, and fingers crossed. Hopefully, I'll have enough energy after working a 10-hour shift tomorrow that I can do another stream. But that's the thing that's ending in January that I'm really because that's no fun for anybody. Kind of worked my way out of that at last. So that's nice. But until then, I'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island. Thanks for watching. Special thank you to Henry Brown. It's such a lovely treat when you guys do that super chat for us because it's just a nice surprise. Never really go in expecting it, so I mad respect for those of you who do it. That's great. I don't know. It's a nice thing for you to do. And Henry Brown says we should have a comic party. We should. Well, I have a lot of friends who are eager to get back into streaming once I'm allowed to have people back in here, which I actually am not because of my other job. That was an agreement we all reached, just for obvious reasons with the pandemic. Because I work in healthcare, I can't have people coming and going all the time. Oh, did not end after all that? Well, at least I didn't say or do anything.